All right, next question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Amber, when did the first act of physical violence by Mr. Depp occur?
Objection asked and answered.
No, overruled. Go ahead.
That would have been early 2012.
And how did you determine this?
I reviewed my therapist's
Objection,
notes.
hearsay.
She hasn't even answered it, Your
All
Honor.
right, I'll allow the answer.
By reviewing my therapist's notes.
Objection,
All right,
hearsay.
I'll sustain the objection.
Your Honor, but it's not offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. It's explaining what she looked at.
I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. When did you earlier believe the first act of physical violence occurred?
Well, I had always believed up until recently that it had started later, that the violence started around early 2013, not early 2012.
Now, you testified earlier that the first act of physical violence by Mr. Depp related to the Winona Wino tattoo. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
Okay. Does that change your testimony, realizing that this is earlier? Was this, in fact, still the first act?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
What was the first act?
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained.
How do you remember the first act of violence?
Well, you never forget it. That's how I remember it. It changes your life forever. You never forget the first time someone hits you like that. I just had the date wrong.
Okay. And how is it that you think you got the date wrong?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overruled.
I'm embarrassed to say I think I would have liked to have believed that the period of time in which I had to fall in love with Johnny, in which we fell in love and he was sober and he wasn't violent to me, lasted for a lot longer than it did. I think I would have liked to have believed that I wasn't hit so early in the relationship and still stayed. He was also sober for a period in 2012, which was a peaceful time for us, in which we fell in love. So I had kind of allowed myself, I guess, to forget that the beginning of that period, 2012, before he got sober, was really violent and chaotic as well. I'm embarrassed to say that.
Now, you testified that the police were called multiple times. Other than the May 21, 2016, what other occasions were there where the police were called?
They were called in December of 2011. They were called in 2012. They were called in 2013 in March by the landlord. I had sought advice from Laurel Anderson as to whether I should call the police.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. When you filed the domestic violence temporary restraining order, how many acts of abuse did you allege at that time?
I gave the last couple, I believe, last two incidents, maybe three.
And why didn't you tell of all the acts of abuse at that time?
I was following advice from my counsel.
Okay. How many instances of abuse were included in the UK trial?
There were 14 acts of physical abuse and violence and 3 acts of sexual abuse. Violence.
And why were those 17 included in the UK trial?
Well, I was not a party, a direct party. I was a witness, so it was whatever their counsel, the Sun counsel, chose.
Okay. When is the first time you were called upon to provide a detailed accounting of as many times as you could recall of physical and sexual abuse by Mr. Depp?
Objection, hearsay.
That's not hearsay, Your Honor. I'm asking her when she was called upon to do so.
Well, the objection is hearsay.
Right, but it's not offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and it's just asking for date.
All right, overruled.
Thank you.
A few months ago, February in 2022, this year, was the first time I was asked to do so, other than cold in a deposition.
Okay. And when you were asked to provide those, what did you do to be able to prepare that accounting, that full accounting?
Well, I had the benefit of my therapist.
Objection, hearsay.
So, Your Honor, she's not saying what the therapist said. I'm just asking.
I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I looked at my therapist notes. I had the benefit of those notes, which we had received in February, as well as I reviewed calendars, photos, text messages, my journals, my diaries, of which there were many. I put all of those together. It took a lot of time to be able to, adequately refresh my recollection and fill in the details over the course of the 5 years we were together.
And what did you do when you put that all together?
I kind of filled in and collected all of these various pieces of information and gave a fuller account as best I could for each incidents of violence that I had record of. I think it was called an interrogatory.
In this case?
In this case,
All right.
excuse
Did
me.
you sign that under oath?
I did.
Okay, and it was provided to counsel for Mr. Depp?
It was.
Okay. And was it a pretty lengthy document?
It was far too long.
And how is it that you didn't just remember all of those events like this?
That's not how your memory or my memory works. We were together for 5 years, almost 4.5, and it was a very violent, chaotic, at times very loving, emotional relationship. So as anyone can imagine, there was a lot going on, and unfortunately the violence became almost normal, especially towards the end. It was just, it's hard to say that now, but the violence was almost normal. And, your brain does with trauma what it does, puts it away best you can. So frankly, I was shocked to see a lot of the information presented to me through my therapist's notes, because she was taking them in real time.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
All right, I'll sustain my objection.
Okay, we'll move past what the therapist said in her notes. Okay. Now, there's one more. You also provided a declaration in this case early on. Do you recall that, trying to move the case to California?
Yes, there was a declaration in 2019.
All right. And did you describe some of the events of violence in that declaration?
Objection, leading.
What, if anything, was said about violent acts in that declaration?
I was taking the advice of my counsel. It was to get it moved, I believe.
Okay. And was there, did you include all of them?
No.
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
Thank you.
No, I did not include all of the incidents of violence. That was not the point of making this declaration. We were making this declaration in an effort to move it to California, because as hard as it is to go through this sort of trial as it is, it's even harder to do so in a place that neither Johnny nor I are connected to.
Okay. Now, you testified earlier about guitars, and you said you've never played a guitar. Have you ever played a guitar player in a movie?
You could say I posed with a guitar. It turns out I am an unteachable.
Okay.